Right. We got Coffee House. Mr. Baller come out on Sunday. Saturday, y'all give me something to react to for tomorrow, man. This is a good Friday. Hopefully y'all have a great Friday. I think this is actually happy Friday or some shit like that. I think it's next Friday though. But anyway, man, make sure y'all give me a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. Let's go ahead and get into the video. I ain't got nothing to say.
In England, strange letters with aggressive demands began to appear at a family's residence. Sadly, nothing could be done to save her, and only a few days later, she was found dead. But when the same pattern emerged with another woman only 6 months later, the authorities knew that they were up against the clock to save Stephanie Slater. A wild goose chase followed, thrusting some unexpected heroes down dark and dangerous paths. But how would all of this end? Who was behind these venomous kidnappings? And would Stephanie ever make it out alive? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at a case so twisted and deceitful that it shocked the UK to its very core. Now, this story involves a range of pretty deplorable behaviour. We have kidnap, ransom, murder, and even train derailment. So get ready for that one. I'd like to remind you that I cover a range of true crime and darkly fascinating stories. If that's your kind of thing, please help me out and subscribe. And before we begin this story today, I wanted to ask you something. How do you like to consume your content outside of these YouTube videos? Now, personally, I spend so much of my day reading, writing, and researching these cases that, by the evening, I don't want to ever look at a screen again. Honestly, you have no idea how much time goes into making these stories. And to add to that,
and my salutes to the people that do it. For you dumb idiots that always tell us you're doing nothing but stealing content. It's not stealing content if it's a reaction video. This is a reaction channel, so ignore the dumb shit. But the people that actually look for these crimes have different details. Like Chinna Scares yesterday, I reacted to some of the stories he had yesterday. Some of them I seen, but the detail he had way more different details that I've seen on them cases. So you feel me? Yeah.
If I'm working out, walking, or simply cooking, then consuming content with my eyes can be rather tricky. Which is why I rely on the sponsor of today's video, Audible, for my entertainment. Audible is unbeatable for thrilling audio and left me speechless in the thrillers. Go to Audible, and now with the...
Oh man, one question?
And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Michael Sams.
Michael Sams.
Today, I'm taking you to the middle of the United Kingdom, and to an English region known as the Midlands. Now, having lived here for a while myself, I'm rather familiar with the area. From the castles of Warwickshire to the cities of Leicester and Nottingham, it isn't a bad place to be at all. But I do admit that it's not the most exciting either. If you ever find yourself in the Midlands, I'd say it's worth checking out Leamington Spa, a small city with beautiful architecture and parks. However, I would probably skip Birmingham. Those are 2 years that I'm never getting back. Birmingham doesn't have the most outstanding reputation, and many of its residents are rather vocal about its many glaring issues. It's also known as the UK's capital city for knife crime by concentration, so I'll let that speak for itself. However, Birmingham does have several great shopping centres and the Cadbury Chocolate Factory, if that's your sort of thing. Saying that, if you want that Willy Wonka experience that everyone is talking about at the moment, you must travel 300 miles north to Glasgow.
300 miles.
Anyway, this story takes us back to the year 1991, with a young woman named Julie Dart. Born on March 1st, 1973, Julie had a rather difficult upbringing and often found herself in trouble, even from a very young age. This was typically through spending money that she'd never had, and often getting herself into large sums of debt. And moving into the year 1991, she yet again found herself to be down on her luck. Barely an adult and with no career, she was left with the heartbreaking decision to work the streets of Leeds, taking to the red light district in Chapeltown to try and salvage her ever-growing debt. At the time, her family had no idea what was going on. Instead, Julie would tell them that she was working long hours at the hospital. Her family were none the wiser, and unfortunately, it would only become evident that things were not as they seemed in mid-July 1991. And that realization came in the worst way possible. Julie had suddenly disappeared, and although it was rather typical for her to be silent for a day or two, her family started to worry after several days. Things took an evil turn on July the 12th when her boyfriend Dominic received a strange letter through the post. And apparently, it was written by Julie. Within this letter, she wrote that she'd been kidnapped and now feared for her life. And although she was being offered food, she hadn't eaten in multiple days. She ended the letter by saying that he had until Monday to alert her mother and the authorities, and that her abductor was asking for £140,000. In today's terms, that's £300,000 or $375,000. The letter read, "Hello Dominic, help me please. I've been kidnapped and I'm being held as a personal security until next Monday night. Please go and tell my mum straight away. I love you so much. Mum, phone the police straight away and help me. I haven't eaten anything, but I have been offered food. Feeling a bit sick, but I'm still drinking 2 cups of tea per day. Help me."
This sound kind of a little iffy to me already. Not gonna lie to you.
Members of Julie's family were able to confirm that the handwriting was in fact hers, but something seemed off about it. It seemed to be messy and haphazard. Soon after, the authorities started analysing it for any clues they could find, and that is when another letter came through. This one indicated a drop-off point for the ransom money. The letter requested that they deliver it to New Street Station in Birmingham, found miles away from home. The letter further demanded that they wait for a phone call at the payphone on Platform 9. The authorities complied with this request, and when the payphone rang at precisely 7 p.m, they knew it was her abductor. But unfortunately, the call didn't quite go to plan. After picking up the phone, the undercover officer was met with absolute silence. Furthermore, nobody arrived to collect the money, and no further correspondence was made. While the authorities had complied with the demands in hopes of rescuing Julie, little did they know that, tragically, it was already too late. And on July the 19th, 1991, officers received reports of a suspicious-looking pile in a field found in the town of Easton in Lincolnshire. And sadly, as you may expect, these reports would end in terrible news.
R.I.P., man.
Wrapped in this bundle of sheets was Julie's lifeless body. She was bound with duct tape and had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. Forensics determined that she'd been dead for roughly 4 or 5 days already, meaning that at the time of the negotiations, she had already been murdered. The news was sure to leave her family devastated, and to compound to the pain and grief in her loss, they had no idea who murdered Julie. At this point, it wasn't clear whether her abductor had any intention of handing her over alive or dead, and while his motives would eventually come to light, it currently wasn't obvious. The callous way in which Julie was found indicated that her killer was neither sophisticated or interested in permanently concealing her body. But the callousness would not stop there, because shortly after, the authorities would receive a second letter, this time written using a typewriter. And its author was now far more demanding. Once again, he was demanding money from the authorities, threatening that if they failed to comply to his actions, then many more prostitutes would die. The letter went on to say that Julie had died from 3 blows to the head before being strangled. And with such dreadful accuracy, it was sure that this letter was linked to her killer. Back then, it was typical for the police to cooperate with the killer via personal ad spaces in local newspapers. In this instance, the officers did this to confirm that they would pay him, and shortly after doing so, the authorities received yet another letter. This cat-and-mouse chase would go on for several more months, with Julie's killer even teasing the authorities by sending in handwritten letters over time. Despite their best efforts, detectives were still none the wiser in finding their suspect, and this would apply tremendous pressure on them too. With fresh threats against other women being persistent through these letters, it meant that no one in the Midlands was safe. Their devious pen pal even threatened to derail a passenger train if they didn't send him the money. Undoubtedly, he seemed to enjoy the power of toying with the police. Our story would develop yet again in January 1992, when the authorities received a phone call from a local estate agent. They'd called the authorities to report that, after one of their agents had left to show someone a property, she never returned. The home was located on Turnberry Road, which can be found north of Birmingham. Stephanie Slater, who was born and raised in Birmingham, was 25 years old at the time and still lived with her parents. At the time, she had a steady relationship with her boyfriend, and the two had recently booked a holiday to the Isle of Wight, which is one of Stephanie's favourite places. Hoping to pay off the holiday, she had picked this job up only a few weeks prior. Despite her recent start, she was already known to be a pleasant, reliable and punctual worker, which of course made her sudden disappearance that much more concerning to her manager. And then, just a few hours later, her manager received a tape through the front door. Playing the tape immediately, he heard Stephanie's voice on the other end of the recorder.
Wait, so he know she worked there too? Wow. And it's sitting to a job is fucking crazy.
Within this tape, she said, "This is Stephanie Slater. The time is 11:45. I assure you I am okay and unharmed, and providing these instructions are carried out, I will be released on Friday the 31st of January."
I know you've only known each other a short while, but I just feel like you get...
Her manager informed the authorities immediately, who instantly became aware that Stephanie's disappearance was likely linked to the same man who murdered Julie. Despite this knowledge, they had very little evidence to work with. I mean, this was 1992 after all. DNA and forensic methods were still very primitive.
Did they have DNA back then?
Traditional ways to get by. Police began their search of the property, and what they found wasn't good. Blood was present on the bathroom walls, which was later confirmed to belong to Stephanie. If the authorities had any chance to get Stephanie back home alive, then they knew that they had to act fast. After all, Julie's killer had already proven himself to be rather impatient. The videotape demanded that her supervisor and manager, Kevin Watts, would be the one to drop the money off for her, and thankfully, he was willing to comply. On January the 27th, 1992, Kevin was instructed to travel north to Glossop train station and then asked to follow various clues. This included meeting a planted woman at the train station, various phone calls scattered through public phone boxes, and a long drive down a dark road, eventually leading him to a secluded bridge in the fog. And then, while under the cover of darkness, Kevin found himself in front of a tray which had been placed on the wall of the abandoned railway bridge. He was instructed to drop the money into it, and then moments later, the string was pulled and it disappeared into the fog. Although he was in constant contact with the authorities and had even been tailed by dozens of officers, the money slipped off the edge of the bridge and then into darkness. And just like that, her kidnapper was once again lost to the night. Stephanie's abductor remained silent that time, leaving her family on the edge of their seats in desperate hope that she may be released. And that is when, only a few hours later, there was a knock at the front door. Undercover officers opened the door to a dazed yet alive Stephanie Slater. Despite their grave concerns, her kidnapper had remained true to his word. And although she appeared to be in an agitated frame of mind, she was otherwise relatively healthy. An interview with officers would reveal some stark details.
I feel bad for people that go through traumatized experiences like that. Like, it is so crazy that what people do for money. Because at the end of the day, that's all he wants is money. All he wants is money. It's fucking crazy. Go get a fucking job, man. You ain't gotta kidnap nobody just to get some money.
According to Stephanie, her abductor was a man in his 40s who used a fake name to visit the property. While showing him around the home, she then walked into the bathroom. That was when he hit her over the head with a hammer, bound and blindfolded her, and then took her to his car. The next thing Stephanie knew, she found herself in what she could only describe as a damp cellar. The room was dark, musky and cold, and precisely the sort of place you'd expect to be murdered. Sadly, she was then asked to strip before being assaulted by her assailant. After that, she was placed inside a wooden coffin which was then placed inside a capsized bin.
Oh, boy.
During her time of imprisonment,
A wooden
Stephanie
coffin?
was left inside of this confined area. She was only allowed out to be given life-sustaining food, was kept naked, and was unable to bathe. Now, despite these terrible conditions, Stephanie made use of her kind and calming nature to appeal to her assailant, smiling, joking, and even laughing a few times to humanize herself. This sort of clever manipulation likely made her more impressionable to her assailant, helping him develop feelings and helping her avoid her murder. Stephanie recorded voice notes, wrote letters, and gave in to whatever demands he wanted from her, all while being told that, as long as she and her people outside complied, she would eventually be set free. It would seem that her brave efforts to comply with the man would eventually pay off. Even after receiving the ransom money, Stephanie seemed to comply to her monster, and eventually, as promised, she was set free, despite this being a significant risk to
You know
the
that
kidnapper.
that's his second time more doing it? Yeah.
Only 12 hours after her release, Stephanie was asked to make a public announcement. She appeared to be dazed, drugged, and distressed. And following her statement, it seemed that her kidnapper had become quite nervous about the situation. Unknown to him at the time, but he was still out of sight from detectives. But after letting his nerves get the better of him, this wouldn't last for long. In response to the public announcement, he called her employer once more to threaten them. However, little did he know that a recording device had been implanted into the landline, and that, furthermore, every word that came out of his mouth was recorded for the rest of the world to hear. After exhausting all other avenues, the authorities decided to use this voice recording against him. I mean, the man was still faceless, but at least he wasn't without a voice. On February the 20th, 1992, the BBC released this phone call on an episode of Crime Watch, attaching his voice to an artist's impression of the man that Stephanie had orchestrated. And surprisingly, one of those watching this episode was haunted to recognize his voice as no one other than her ex-husband, Michael Sams. At the time, this man was 41 years old and living in Sutton-on-Trent in Nottinghamshire. Michael was previously in the army, but now was a service engineer who repaired central heating systems. And according to his ex-wife, she was not surprised by his actions either. Apparently, he had already tried to extort money illegally, with his first crime in 1978 when he stole a car to commit insurance fraud. While in prison for this, he was diagnosed with cancer, which unfortunately led to the amputation of his leg. It turns out that our kidnapper was actually physically disabled, making his story of being a kidnapper a little more unusual. Unfortunately, his time in prison would not deter him from carrying on a life of extortion. He would often threaten train companies in derailing the passenger trains, and even threatened to poison food at local supermarkets if they didn't give in to his demands.
Okay.
Michael had already been married twice, had 2 children, and now lived with his third wife in a shared cottage.
Damn, 3?
And after being identified as a perfect fit for the suspect, he was swiftly arrested on charges of the murder of Julie Dart and the abduction of Stephanie Slater. Moving forward, it didn't take long for Stephanie to positively identify him as her assailant. And it's here that the true horrors of Michael Sams finally came to light.
Dumbass.
After his identification, the authorities made their way to his property, and after looking in the back garden, there they found an old building called his...
So the other shit that he did, threatening the other folk, that go into that category. We're full of dummies.
Workshop. It was here that they witnessed a dark, messy, damp room, which was soon confirmed to be the same location that Stephanie had been held in for 8 long days. It was later revealed that during this time frame, he even attached electrodes to her and threatened to electrocute her if she escaped. No surprise, he was also accused of abducting and murdering Julie Dart, and although he initially denied these allegations, forensics would later confirm that she had been in the exact same room. Clothing found over her body contained yellow fibers that positively matched the carpet found in his workshop, meaning that there was next to no doubt that he was in fact her murderer.
Hey, if your partner is being secretive with their phone, you need to do this now. Many people are unaware this simple.
Moving forward, Michael Sams eventually stood trial in 1993. And although he would plead guilty to kidnapping Stephanie Slater, he denied any involvement in Julie's murder. The prosecution claimed that he used Julie as a practice run, using vulnerable women as bargaining chips for his own personal profit. This was substantiated by the fact that she had been murdered before any contact with the outside world. Michael had never intended to release her. He was merely testing the waters. Although Michael continued to deny these claims, forensic evidence would suggest otherwise. And thankfully, all of his efforts would be in vain. On July 8, 1993, he was found guilty of kidnapping Stephanie Slater and murdering Julie Dart. As a result, he was given a life sentence. He was further tried for his crimes of blackmail and extortion, including 4 separate charges against British Rail and several against the police. To be honest though, rail prices in the UK are literally daylight robbery, so I don't think anyone cares about those charges. Nevertheless, he was found guilty of all 4 instances of blackmail and given an additional 10 years for each. At the age of 42, Michael knew that he had next to no chance of experiencing life again as a free man. And so, just 3 days after his verdict, he decided to come clean and confess Julie's murder. He requested to see the senior investigating police officer, where he then went into graphic detail about the crime. He further claimed that his confession was motivated by sparing Julie's mother from any more heartbreak. He said, "I've been going over it and thinking it's only fair that she knows I did it. I mean, I obviously did do it. What can I tell her? I do feel sorry for her, yes." Despite his confession, Michael continued to be a monster. Just 2 years later, in 1995, he attacked a female parole officer with a metal spike, adding 8 years to his sentence. Even after being condemned to a cell, Michael tried to con money out of the judicial system. He routinely complained that his human rights were being violated, and would often whine about being put into solitary confinement. I mean, last time I checked, you were put into prison, mate, not the Carlton. However, he would be successful one time, as officers would lose his artificial leg during one of his transfers. As a result, he was awarded £4,000 compensation, this of course sparking public outrage. With no minimum term recommended at his trial, Michael has repeatedly applied for parole, with his most recent rejection being in April 2023. Despite this, and even to this day, he remains behind bars as one of the UK's oldest and longest serving prisoners. And with him now 82 years old, things are not looking promising for him. Although Stephanie survived her encounter with Michael, her life was riddled with post-traumatic stress that followed. In 1993, she moved to the Isle of Wight to retreat away from it all, though sadly, her trauma never left her. No longer being able to return to work as an estate agent, she went on to help the authorities in dealing with kidnapped survivors and directly help victims recover from their experiences. Sadly, after a long battle with cancer, Stephanie Slater passed away at the age of 50 in August 2017. She is said to have never fully gotten over the horrors that she faced, and it's devastating to learn that she was never given the time to recover fully. Stephanie was genuinely kind-hearted and had a future that sadly was tainted by a selfish monster. Julie Dart, who was taken from this world at the tender age of 18, was merely used by Michael to acquire money. And although her family could find some closure in his punishment, Julie would tragically lose decades of her life only for Michael to test out his ransom scheme.
That's crazy.
Julie's family...
That is fucking crazy, man. Y'all, females, I say this every time, watch y'all surroundings. You never know if somebody weird trying to kidnap you or try to do anything to you. The things people do for money is crazy. You'll be surprised what people do for money. That being said, give your thumbs up and subscribe. Coffee House, you did your thing like you always do. Came with it, good details about the video and about her family and everything. That being said, give your thumbs up, like, and subscribe. See you when I see y'all. I might do music videos tomorrow. Don't know. But if I do, y'all will. Let's ride him.